are the most terrifying things you've encountered at a morgue or funeral home? 1. A friend of my girlfriend's family works at a morgue and often drives a hearse. He said that after death, bodies can move and make noises as gases and fluids slowly escape. Corpses might moan softly in the back of the hearse while he drives, and sometimes they suddenly sit up before collapsing. Imagine driving, hearing moans from the corpse behind you, then looking in the rearview mirror and seeing it sit up, staring at you. 2. As a teenager, I worked at a morgue, and it was one of my favorite jobs. I didn't handle medical procedures, but helped move bodies and prepare for funerals. What's interesting is that bodies can sometimes grab you, and when moved, they often release air from their lungs. 3. I'm an administrative assistant at a small funeral home in a small town. The job is pretty simple. The other day, when I thought I was alone in the building, I swear, I heard coughing from the back office. The scariest thing for me is dealing with bodies in horrific conditions. I never imagined I'd see corpses in the states some of them are in. 4. My mom told me that a funeral director in our town once left the funeral service of a newborn baby so tragic. When he returned, the baby's body was gone. It turned out the father, overwhelmed with grief and exhaustion, had taken the body. They found him at a nearby family dollar store, holding his child's body and begging people to hold his son. He was talking to the body as if it were alive. An employee looked closer and realized the baby was clearly deceased in the man's arms. 5. I used to be a security guard at a hospital. One night, while patrolling, I entered the surgical ward and saw a doctor staring at the whiteboard with the surgery schedule. I said, "Hello, doctor." But he didn't respond, just kept looking at the board. Back at the security office, I told a veteran colleague about greeting the doctor with no response, asking if it was the rude guy they warned me about. I mentioned seeing him in the surgical ward, and he laughed, saying the ward closes at 9 p.m. and no one should be there. When I confirmed the doctor was studying the schedule, he said I'd just seen Dr. Luisiti, apparently, years ago. A surgeon jumped to his death from the hospital's helipad. Yet, it seems he's still working. 6. I worked at a nursing home and long-term care facility. The scariest thing was the man in the corner phenomenon. Many patients near death would say they saw a shadowy figure standing in the corner of their room. 7. I was a funeral transport technician, mainly moving bodies from where they died to where they needed to go. Like morgues or science facilities, bodies sometimes have multiple appointments. One time, I had an unforgettable experience. I delivered a body to a science donation facility where bodies are donated for research. I wheeled the body in, unlocked the freezer, placed it on a slab, and slid it onto a shelf. What's odd is that in the freezer, most processed body parts are wrapped in blue tape, and you can tell what's inside legs, arms, feet. At the time, I found it kind of fascinating. After finishing, I locked the freezer and pushed the gurney toward the garage door. The area was L-shaped, with the freezer in the long part and a desk and filing cabinets at the corner. When I turned the corner, I nearly had a heart attack. A man was standing there, looking at files in a cabinet. He looked normal, dressed modernly, but not in the usual style for that place. It was about 1 a.m., and I'd never seen anyone there that late. I stopped and said, "He almost scared me to death." He didn't react, as if he didn't hear or notice me. I apologized for possibly startling him and continued my work, returning the gurney to the van and locking the garage door from inside. He was still there, staring at an open file, ignoring me. I needed to use the bathroom, so I told him I'd be right back. No response. I thought maybe he was deaf. When I returned from the bathroom, he was gone, but the filing cabinet was still open. I didn't know where he went, and I didn't hear anyone walk past the bathroom. I checked everything I was responsible for, and it was all locked. I announced loudly that I was leaving and locking up to arm the alarm, but no one answered. I finished and left. I don't know who he was or what happened, but it was a very strange experience, and I still remember it clearly. I have a few other stories from that job if you want to hear, but none are as eerie as this one. 8. I worked at a morgue and once had to pick up a body from the medical examiner's office. When receiving a body, you get a receipt listing the deceased's personal belongings. When I brought the body back, I opened the body bag to check if everything matched the receipt. When I opened the bag, I was stunned. The man looked almost identical to me. He was my age, had similar tattoos in the same places, long hair like mine, and even wore jewelry like what I had on. I stood there, shocked, in an existential crisis. Just then, the embalmer walked in and said, "Hey Spartan, you okay? Oh my God, this guy looks just like you." It was the only time I had nightmares, dreaming I was in the body bag and he was dissecting me. 9. I was a nurse in the oncology ward, which had rooms for end-of-life patients receiving palliative care. One patient we'd cared for over weeks passed away early one morning. After the shift staff completed procedures, the body was moved to the hospital morgue, leaving only the task of cleaning personal belongings and sanitizing the room. I assigned this to a student nurse I was mentoring, as she knew the patient and was comfortable with the task. About 10 minutes later, a colleague said the student had run out of the room, pale as a sheet, sobbing in the break room. I went to check on her, and she said while cleaning the bathroom sink area, she glanced in the mirror and saw the deceased patient's reflection, staring at her over her shoulder. The student was level-headed, not easily rattled, but for the rest of her internship, she never went near that room again. 10. I'm an ICU nurse. We had a patient with sepsis who was 29 weeks pregnant. She went into labor while I was on shift, but the baby was stillborn. I handled the baby's body, placing it in an appropriate container and taking it to the morgue. It was midnight, and I was alone in the elevator. Suddenly, I heard a baby crying, panicked. I tore open the container's wrapping and was about to unzip the bag when a calm male voice said, "Hush, little one. Daddy's got you. No need to cry." The crying stopped instantly. Trembling, I opened the bag and saw exactly what I expected: a 29-week-old stillborn baby. I'm a 40-year-old ICU nurse with a beard. And this was the scariest thing I've ever experienced. No one believes me to this day. I don't even want to guess what that crying or voice was. Writing this still makes my chest tighten. 11. I'm a surgical medical ward nurse. And the strangest thing I've encountered happened around 2 or 3 a.m. A patient chart on a rack was pulled out twice. Even though no one touched it or was nearby, at the same time, a CIWI alcohol withdrawal patient at the end of the hall screamed that someone was leaving her room. I didn't believe her much, as Kiwa patients often hallucinate, but the timing was really eerie. 12. When I was a kid, my mom shared stories from her time as a nurse in the ER at an old Virginia hospital in the mid-1980s. Right after nursing school, the nurses there often talked about two strange phenomena: the man in the hat and patient 1. The man in the hat would appear and stand outside a patient's room after visiting hours. Those patients often died soon after. Patient 1 was a woman in an old-fashioned hospital gown. She'd walk down the hall and enter a random room. Patients in those rooms often went into critical condition, needing immediate resuscitation. The nurses saw the man in the hat as a harbinger of death and patient 1 as a warning that an ambulance would soon be needed. 13. The day my mom passed away, our family gathered around her bedside, waiting for the final moment. My fiance's sister, her mom, and their nephew were there for support. At exactly 3:32 p.m. my mom took her last breath when I went out to meet them. My fiance's sister said, "You won't believe this, but a few minutes ago, Noah was playing on the floor, then suddenly looked up, smiled, waved, and said, 'Goodbye.' The eerie part is that he did this at exactly 3:32 p.m. 14. I worked at a nursing home. Some patients in certain rooms complained about a man appearing in their rooms at night. Since hallucinations are common in the elderly, we didn't pay much attention. One night, around 1 a.m., I was in the dining room with a large window facing the garden. It was pitch black outside and dark inside. Suddenly, I felt a chilling sense of being watched. Looking up at the window, I saw the reflection of a man behind me. He wore a brown suit, a bowler hat, and had the most malicious grin with an unnaturally wide mouth. It lasted a few seconds. I turned around, but no one was there. I'll never forget that evil expression. After that, I paid closer attention and realized many patients described seeing the same man. It seemed he enjoyed terrifying people. 15. While working in the cardiology ward, we had a private room at the end of the hall, used for palliative care or isolation patients. Over the years, 3 different patients told me they woke up in the middle of the night to see an old man and a young girl holding hands, standing silently at the foot of their bed, just watching. 16. Marilyn loved music, often listening to her iPod shuffle with big headphones. but her health declined over time. I helped her get ready for bed, and she'd get upset when she forgot how to do things. Playing music from my phone, Frank Sinatra and the Beatles calmed her. Soon, she became bedridden, but still enjoyed music. During COVID, Marilyn's condition worsened quickly. Since her quality of life was poor, and she was comfortable in her fully furnished apartment, we didn't move her. Eventually, her dementia progressed to the point she forgot how to swallow. Marilyn passed away in her apartment room 202 with me, the head nurse, and her family by her side. Afterward, I prepared her body, styling her hair as she liked and pinning her iPod to her clothes. A few days later, a resident in room 203, Marilyn's neighbor, kept wandering into the hall at 3 a.m. during night shifts, complaining about loud music from room 202. The apartment was empty, with only Marilyn's belongings. She said the music was deafening, but whenever night staff checked, they heard nothing. 17. I work as a housekeeper and activities coordinator at an assisted living facility, and I understand feeling more sadness than fear. I remember a resident who often joined my activities. When she passed away, which was expected the next day, the light outside her apartment flickered and went out. I went in to clean and saw her wheelchair still there. When I touched the armrest where she'd sit, it was warm. It felt like a chance to say goodbye to her again, which was meaningful overall. This facility often has eerie disturbances. Residents and caregivers just accept it as part of life in a place where many have passed. Chetuvir. 18. I'm a nurse at a hospital in a wealthy Mississippi town. The hospital has 2 ICUs, and the second, on the 3rd floor, called the overflow unit, has 7 rooms. Room 2 is said to be haunted. Many nurses have seen a figure walk into the room, but it's empty if no patient is there. One time, around 4 a.m., a nurse was preparing to change a patient's bandage in room 2. When she brought in supplies, the patient asked what she was doing. She said, "Changing your bandage," the patient replied. "Oh no, the other nurse came in 30 minutes ago and already did it." The nurse checked, and the bandage was indeed fresh. She went out, thanked the other nurse for doing it, but the other nurse was confused, saying, "I didn't change it." Both were a bit freaked out. Rumor has it a long-time hospital nurse died in that room. The hospital is now a university dorm, so students there might have some spooky experiences. 19. When a friend's father was young, he worked at a morgue one night. He and his supervisor left the building keys in the morgue before bed. He went down to get them and saw a body under a sheet sit up and moan. Panicked, he ran out screaming. His supervisor explained that this sometimes happens due to gases escaping the body after death, causing strange phenomena. 20. This is a story my mom heard from her ex-boyfriend, Tom. When she was young, my grandfather ran a funeral business in a small town in the late 1960s. The morgue was attached to our family home, and my mom thought it was normal. One day, Tom came over when no one was home. They'd been dating a while, so he let himself in to wait for my mom. On his way in, he noticed the morgue's door and window were open. So he checked, found it empty, closed everything, and went inside. A few minutes later, he heard a loud slam from the morgue. He ran to check and found the door and window wide open again. Terrified, he left immediately. When he told my grandfather, he calmly explained that they'd received an elderly woman's body that morning. He said spirits might have come to greet or visit her. He told Tom to leave the door and window open next time. 21. My brother died of leukemia at 8 months old. He had the disease from birth and was buried next to my grandmother, who passed away over a decade later. My uncle often visited my grandmother's grave and left small toy cars on my brother's. One time, a new grave was nearby, and the family held an overnight prayer vigil. When my uncle visited our family's graves, someone from the other family approached him. They said that late at night, they glimpsed a young boy playing near our family's graves, but no one could get close to him. My uncle looked at my brother's grave and noticed the toy cars were gone. 22. In the 1980s, I was a police officer. One night, around 3 a.m., I was patrolling the streets, checking building doors to ensure they were locked. A few days earlier, the town's only morgue had burned down. The building was almost completely destroyed, but the front door remained intact. As I passed by, I checked it and found it unlocked, so I stepped inside. Everything inside was charred black, just burnt wood everywhere, and I couldn't see much. I walked down the hallway to the main room. There, I was stunned to see, in the middle of the blackened room, on a small pedestal, a white velvet child's coffin, sized for a toddler. It was pristine, not a speck of soot or burn mark despite the entire building being destroyed. I backed away, turned around, and left immediately. 23. While in nursing school, I worked as a night shift technician on a general hospital floor. During the pandemic, our upstairs sister floor became the COVID ward. One night, the upstairs staff called to say a patient had died, but they were out of body bags. I went up with a nurse to deliver one. On our way back to our floor, the elevator doors closed normally, but the elevator didn't move. Suddenly, the doors opened and closed again. Then it started moving. We looked at each other, and the nurse said loudly, "It's okay. We'll show you the way out. Hospital windows don't open like they used to, so I guess spirits have to take the elevator to leave." 24. I live at the cemetery where I work, and I've experienced some strange things. My house has an office attached to the kitchen, leading to another living room. One time, while cooking in the kitchen, my dog suddenly stood up and barked at the office door. While barking, it slowly and fearfully moved through the office toward the living room door. I thought, "What's wrong with this dog?" and followed. At the living room door, it barked furiously, but refused to step inside. I checked the living room, but there was nothing. I called the dog in, but it kept barking, its back fur raised, refusing to cross the threshold. Finally, I closed both the office and living room doors. The dog calmed down but still stared at the door, growling. It was so weird. 25. I worked as a nurse in a nursing home and later in the ICU at a hospital operating for nearly 70 years, with reports of paranormal activity since it opened. Strange things like moving objects, flickering lights, shadowy figures, and even ghost patients, especially children, were noted. The worst I heard was a staff member seeing a demon crawling on the ceiling in a dark hallway, with about 10,000 deaths here. Most incidents happened at night, making staff very nervous. One night, working overtime until around 4 a.m., I heard a piercing scream from where my colleague was working. I ran over and found him on the floor, terrified. He said he saw a patient walk from room 57 to 58, but that area had only one patient who couldn't walk. I asked if another staff member was with him, and he said only Jared, who was behind him. We didn't know who it was, so we assumed it was a hallucination and kept working. Later, while cleaning the same hallway, we heard thumping at the end of the hall. I thought it was another staff member, but then we heard fainter thumps from below. We ignored it, thinking staff were downstairs. Then, heading to room 75, I saw a small shadow dart past the corner of my eye. I asked my colleague, but he saw nothing and told me not to scare him. Right then, a door slammed. We started panicking and called Jared, but he didn't answer. We later learned he was downstairs. Another door slammed. Then we saw an indescribable dark mass charging at us, moaning horribly. We ran for our lives, stopping at the end of the area and looking back. Nothing was there. Everything was quiet, like nothing happened. 2 hours later, a loud crash came from another area. We ran over and found a large piece of equipment on the floor. I asked to check the patient in room 57, and they said the patient was startled but not scared. For the rest of the night, we occasionally saw things in the corner of our eyes, but nothing major happened. It was the scariest experience of my life. After that night, I stopped working night shifts at the hospital, later moving to the ICU and only working until 2 a.m. In short, during that night shift, I experienced inexplicable sounds, object movements, and shadows utterly bizarre. 26. A few years ago, when my mother-in-law passed away, my wife and I went to the funeral home one evening to review some preparations. It was about 6 p.m. and the sun had set, and most staff had left. The atmosphere was a bit creepy, but we thought it was just in our heads. Before leaving, I went to the bathroom, which had one urinal and one toilet. As soon as I walked in, I heard the toilet flush. I used the urinal, then went to wash my hands, but found it odd that no one came out of the toilet stall. I gently pushed the stall door open, and the toilet was empty. I don't know if it was a coincidence or a ghost using the toilet, but I was definitely the only one in there. 27. I work in a hospital lab and once took some limbs, arms, legs to the morgue after hours. We store them in the freezer with the bodies. That time, I went in, placed the limbs in the back, and the door closed. Though it wasn't locked, I couldn't open it. The morgue is in an odd, secluded spot in the hospital, requiring 3 rooms to reach. And it's a large freezer in the basement, in a tunnel connecting 2 buildings, so no one could hear me. I shouted to try to get out, accidentally bumping into a body in the crowded freezer. Luckily, a few minutes later, I got the door open and escaped. The strange part is that a patient I'd cared for over 4 months, someone I talked to a lot, had died that day and was in the morgue then. I'd once told him I was scared of being locked in the morgue when he asked about my job, as he knew he was dying and was curious. I like to think it was him playing a prank on me. 28. While visiting my mom at the funeral home, I left my purse, with my phone inside, on the floor next to her casket. I was busy greeting mourners, so I didn't check my phone until later. There was a draft text on my phone: ASDFQ ghost, ASDFQ ghost, ASDFQ ghost. I put the phone back in my purse and continued greeting people. When I checked again, the message was gone. My siblings and ex-partner, who were there for the viewing, swore they didn't touch my purse or phone. I think the message might have come from another spirit in the funeral home, as the embalming area is in the basement, right below where we were gathered. 29 years ago, while in medical school, I stayed in the anatomy lab to study for an exam the next day. The supervising doctor was a family friend, so I was allowed to stay after hours. It was the 3rd day of exams, and I was exhausted. Whenever I got too sleepy, I'd sing for a few minutes to stay awake. The lab's acoustics were like a bathroom, so I enjoyed singing there. I often sang 1,000 Miles by Vanessa Carlton. When I got to the chorus, if I could fall into the sky, do you think time would pass me by? 'Cause you know I'd walk 1,000 miles if I could just see you. I swear I heard a corpse in the corner moan tonight. It wasn't escaping gas. I know you'll think that, as the body was old, tough, and had been dissected weeks earlier. I left right after and never stayed in the lab alone again unless someone else was there. 30. My sister is a nurse, trained at an old hospital in the 1980s. While training in the maternity ward, a classmate ran to her in a panic, saying a patient in a room at the end of the hall was in labor, bleeding heavily, and needed help. But according to the records, that room had no patient and was used for storage. When they went back to check, the room was empty. An older nurse explained it was the ghost of a young woman who died in childbirth years ago. The classmate was so scared she quit soon after and never returned. My sister said everyone avoided that room for the rest of their training.